Hey science peeps, we're going to go over the water cycle. And this is something that you probably already have done in a previous class or you've seen before. So a lot of this isn't actually super new, but there are going to be some things that I want to point out, make sure that we understand. And there are some terms that we're going to be looking at that I want to make sure that everybody understands too. So one, make sure that you have the water cycle diagram. Talk to the guest teacher that's in the classroom. And then you're already watching this video. That's great. But by the end, we should be able to identify these different things in the diagram, where they are, but also some definitions for them. So here we go. Taking a look at the diagram. So here's kind of what we represent with the water cycle. And it's called the water cycle because water cycles through these various processes and reservoirs for where the water is. And so when we kind of start off, I guess we can start off right here, is we have water that could be in like a lake, ocean, or in a river, but really the water ends up evaporating or evaporation. And that's when it's going from a liquid phase of water to a gaseous phase of water up into the atmosphere. So this can happen just through heat and through the wind, all that stuff. But another way that it gets from the liquid phase to the gas phase is through plants, and that's called transpiration. And as we go through this, I want you to fill in your diagram as we go. And so you should have evaporation, transpiration. Transpiration, again, it happens with plants. Evaporation, like with heat and wind, but both processes take water and put it up into the atmosphere. And as it goes up, it cools down. And that's where you're going to have condensation. And that's when it's changing from your gas phase to a liquid phase or kind of a liquid form in the clouds. Once those clouds end up bubbling up with more water, you end up having precipitation. Where the water can then come out of the clouds and back onto the land or into other bodies of water. But when it comes down here, especially when it gets onto land, a couple things can happen. One, we can have runoff, and runoff is just what it sounds like. It ends up running off of the surface of the land, so like off of the grass, off dirt, and it ends up going into other places like rivers, lakes, oceans, and things like that. So runoff can happen. Sometimes if it doesn't have those places, the runoff ends up building up on land and forming where large lakes or floods, things like that. But another thing that happens with precipitation is when it actually seeps into the ground, and that's a term that we've already used, and that's infiltration. So that water we can kind of think of as infiltrating the ground into the ground, or kind of seeping into the ground. And most times runoff and infiltration tend to happen together, but there are some things that tend to affect these two, and that's dealing with plants. When you have plants like trees, grass, all that stuff, it actually you'll have runoff and infiltration no matter what. But because you have plants, the runoff and infiltration is actually more controlled, and the plants will absorb a lot of that water. So some of that runoff doesn't end up always going into lakes and rivers. It ends up getting absorbed by plants. Same thing with infiltration. Like some of the water gets absorbed by plants, and it does not always seep all the way down into the ground. Plants are really important to these two processes, and help control not having too much runoff, not having too much infiltration. It's good to have a little bit of both, but having too much can sometimes lead to things like landslides. Usually that tends to happen when you don't have plants or grass around in those areas, because the soil can then just wash away and it doesn't end up uh, staying in one place. So that's that part. And then the last one, this is your groundwater. And it's kind of the same thing that we've talked about with groundwater. When water infiltrates into the ground or seeps into the ground, that water in the ground can also move, and it can move to places even like other bodies of water, rivers and lakes. And then that process really kind of starts over again, where you can have evaporation, transpiration, condensation, all that. So it's one big cycle. But that's kind of water cycle. And like I said, something that you've probably seen before. But those are kind of your key terms. The other things you need to know are what those terms mean. I want you to take a look at this list. And there's some here that are pretty easygoing, like evaporation. But I want you to make sure that you have written down things like transpiration, what that actually means. And then these three things: runoff, infiltration, and the role of plants in those two things. I want you to make sure that you have those four things written down in your notes. So that was kind of about it. So thanks for listening, but make sure you show your notes to the teacher who's in the classroom. Make sure that they check you off if you're all done with stuff. You can chill out. So yeah, thanks guys. Have a great day.